Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm looking at leadership and what happens when leaders come under pressure. My guest is leadership coach Carol Kauffman. She's on the faculty at Harvard, where she's the founder of the Institute of Coaching and is the co-author of a new book called Real-Time Leadership: How to Find Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High. With leaders increasingly having to take decisions under time pressure and heavy scrutiny, getting things right is not always easy. On the face of it, leaders ought to be able to rely on experience or gut instinct to see them through. After all, they're in positions of seniority for a reason. But as news headlines constantly remind us, people in leadership positions can and do get things badly wrong. In Real-Time Leadership, Carol and her co-author David Noble introduce a framework called MOVE that can help leaders to make better decisions in challenging times. When the stakes are highest, how can leaders be at their best? How can they master the moment, generate options, and quickly evaluate them before acting? The MOVE framework allows leaders to formulate strategies for what they can do when making decisions under pressure, so that when the time comes, they have a clear set of options available to them. Now, obviously, better decisions taken under pressure equals fewer incidents of human risk in action, so it's of huge interest to me. But even if you're not in a leadership position, the MOVE framework and what Carol has to share is just as relevant to you. Because we're all required to make decisions at difficult times, whether or not we hold a formal leadership position. The context might be different, but the challenges are the same. Whether you're in a leadership position or not, you're going to find this fascinating. So please enjoy my discussion with Carol Kauffman on leadership under pressure. Carol, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. And look, to start us off, can you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. One unknown fact is I was raised in a kennel. Quite literally, imagine life as a little girl, or boy in your case, with 30 dogs. And your first job was a pooper scooper. So from there, I went to working with violent horses and then segued over to people. Or as one CEO once said to me, imagine European gorgeous. You went from alpha horses to alpha men. So I was a clinical psychologist, specialized in trauma. Then I went to a workshop. I won coaching as a raffle prize. Otherwise, I don't think I would have gone there. Then got known in the field, and probably the big interesting experience, which was actually risky, was when I was given a $2 million gift to start the Institute of Coaching. So that's a little bit of me in a nutshell.
Wow. And I mean, that's a fascinating way into coaching, because kids don't grow up with that desire in mind. And so it's something that's come out of experience. And I'm fascinated what spurs you on. Is it a curiosity about people? Is it working with people? What is it that fascinates you about what you do?
Interesting. I'm going to say something that is so obvious, you're going to just pass out. And I have literally not put this connection together until this second, which is, oh my goodness, I can't believe I never thought of this. What am I like as a coach? I am like a puppy. And let's say, how could I not have put this together? Thank you. So imagine you're my client and you have a serious issue. Now imagine you're holding a bone, and the serious issue is a bone that you throw. And I go gambling off it, find it, I come running back, I sit here and I'm like, can I have another? Can I have another? So I have this incredible desire to help people solve interesting, complicated problems. And then my sort of odd life has me come in at a interesting angle for people. So that's what it's like. I love it. I've done 40,000 hours at this point, and I am as excited now as I was when I was a baby.
So you're well past Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours and into this big time. And I think that the way you've just depicted it, there's clearly a passion for what you do and a fascination. Is there a sort of particular type of problem that you like solving, or the particular type of people that you what's a really sort of if the essence of your coaching? What areas of interest or people do you really like working with?
Well, I kid with Marshall Goldsmith that we like the opposite people. He wants to work with people that he knows are going to be successful and who are going to love coaching. I tend to like people who are skeptical and cranky and don't know the largeness of their impact. So that's one thing I like. The other thing I like is that look on their face when they think of something that never would have occurred to them on their own. And very often it's a very technical, complicated question like they'll say something and I'll go, really? And that's a good idea? Can we come up with another? Very, very, very sophisticated.
And I think that's fascinating because one of the things that's always strikes me with coaching is that in many respects it's it's always been there as something, but it's got particularly popular now as we've recognized that there is some value in, I guess, getting help. And if we were to go back, the idea of having a coach, you sort of put it in the therapist bucket. It's a bit, why do you need a coach? It's a bit embarrassing. And now it's become very, very socially acceptable because, well, we recognize that we can't get through on our own and the problems that we're facing nowadays are there. And I wondered, as in your time doing it, how has that shifted? Have you got people coming to you that would never have come to you before? How's that perception of what coaching is changed?
Since I've been coaching, I'd say you're right. It's an absolute radical shift and pivot. And it began, so in 2009, HBR asked me to do a research study on coaching. And even then, among the top of the house leadership coaches, then it was really being seen already as a perk and something you gave to people who you wanted to invest in. And I think that was really ahead of the general consciousness. So I would say that that has definitely shifted. Probably maybe 10% are sort of lagging behind and going, what's wrong that, you're making me get a coach. But most of them, and if they don't, I'll say, listen, we would not be talking if people weren't wanting to make a significant investment in you.
Right. So it's a compliment, right? It is interesting when we think about human capital, because if you were to look at other asset classes that organizations have, you would invest in, if it's machinery, you'll maintain that machinery, you'll make sure it's optimized, it gets regular maintenance schedules. And so there's something interesting about people where historically we haven't necessarily tended to that. And so to your point, the sort of, well, you've obviously got deep problems, hence you need help, has actually now shifted into that. That's perfectly normal. It is what we do, and it's how we get the best out of human capital.
And also, I remember when I started out, and I did a 6-year gig with Harvard Business School doing authentic leadership work at Unilever. And just when Paul Pullman stepped in, he wanted to sort of work with the performance culture there. And what was really fascinating was really seeing that I would start reading these 360s and it would be like, so-and-so, they're good at tactics, but they're not at strategy. They're good at this, but they're not good at that. And I remember being really cranky and thinking, really, seriously, is nobody ever happy? And then I realized, what it is imagine a circle. And what it is you have to keep expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And that's what coaching helps you do. So in fact, if you are good at strategy, but your feet aren't on the ground, coaching will help you say, okay, so let's really look at the practical implications of that. What do you really need to do? Or in your case, okay, what are the actual risks here? You've got your opportunities, your threats, what's coming up behind you? And then maybe they're good with their teams, maybe they're not. And so it's not a go to the left, or go to the right, or go to the right, or go to the left. It's how do you keep expanding that circle of expanding your repertoire, basically. And that's really what coaching is about, is just bringing out the best in that person, but expanding what they're capable of doing.
And one of the reasons that we're able to have this conversation is you've got a book coming out very soon called Real-Time Leadership. Tell us, well, let's start with what is real-time leadership?
Okay. So the book and the subtitle, I wasn't really happy with the subtitle, but it's Real-Time Leadership, Find Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High. So the question is, how do you find your winning moves? And what we sort of based on this is the Viktor Frankl quote of finding the space between a stimulus and a response. So the stimulus might be you're in an important interview and you're tanking. You discover a close coworker has toxic worldview, or you want to buy a house or a company. Okay, so there's all those things. How do you make a space between that stimulus and what you do? And that's called really kind of how do you make the most of every moment? Because gazillions of little windows of opportunity shoot past you. So, okay, so fine. So you want to make a space. What we then do is help you figure out what do you do with that space? Okay, so now something's thrown at me, a challenge, and I have to do something. Well, just making space is great, but where's the map? And that's what we do. A lot of the book is about that map. We've got, business strategy, military strategy, behavioral psychology, cognitive psychology, social systems theory, and then really looking at our clients over the past 5 years of what made the difference. And because things are like this, fast, it's real time. So something's thrown at you. What do you do in real time and make the most of every moment? And most importantly, be able to identify, but then defy your default reaction.
And I think this idea of relying on the default, I find fascinating because it's obviously how we get through life. Because if we had to rethink every single moment we come across, we just wouldn't get anything done, wouldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
And so this model that the human brain uses of, well, I've seen this before, I'll just rerun the thing that I did last time, is something that we naturally rely on and we have to rely on.
Yes.
And yet, as you rightly hint towards, if we do that when the stakes are higher, that can cause us quite a few challenges. And so in many respects, what you're fighting is, very simply, is human instinct here. My instinct tells me I'll just rely on what I did before, but actually maybe that's not the best strategy.
So speaking of instinct, that's just absolutely perfect. And the idea is, most of the people who are listening are already quite successful. If they weren't fairly successful, they would not be listening to this podcast, right? However, and their playbook is probably right 90% of the time, maybe even 95%, where that stereotypical pattern recognition is great, but it's disruptive times. And you either want to disrupt or you will be disrupted. And how can you then know your default reaction and overcome your reflexes? So main reflexes are fight, flight, freeze, and befriend. Befriend is the newest instinct that's been studied, or reflex. And that's like if you see a toddler in front of a bus, you don't think, oh, gee, there's a oops. You grab the little thing. So under more normal circumstances, I've changed that into thinking of the 4 stances, 4 approaches to life and decision making. And so fight becomes lean in. So we lean in and engage. If there's conflict, like we go for it. And you can lean in with enthusiasm. It's not a aggressive thing, but it's active. Or you can lean back and try and not address the conflict, but look at the data, look at the overview, and get a sense of the context. Then leaning with would be focusing on your relationships, connecting to people. And then the hardest one is to not lean, which is to have the discipline to do nothing and then see what comes to you, which when someone's being toxic, it's pretty hard to choose to not react and to do nothing for a moment. So those are kind of the 4 instincts. We translate those into these 4 stances with the idea of you want to be able to rise above your reflex. And ideally, what I like to do with my leaders, so if I was coaching you and you were saying, so think of a quick example of something a challenge you might be facing.
So I'm trying to sell a property at the moment, right? And working out how to do that is taking up a huge amount of my time.
Okay, so there you are. You're trying to sell property. Okay, so in the way, say you negotiate with a potential buyer, are you going to lean in and really do the deal and get stuff done? And here's what we need to do. Okay, so that's leaning in. Leaning back is, well, let's think about the market and the trends. Are we in a near gentrification area? What, as you'll be sort of thinking. And leaning with, it will be, okay, how can we have a win-win situation here? So I can win, this person can win, and in the long term, good relationship and another deal maybe in the future. Or to not lean is you're suddenly put on the spot about something Maybe you discovered a disastrous thing about the property and are terrified that people are going to figure it out in a moment, and you don't know what to do. So how can you just stop and not lean at all, and then see what kind of intuitive hit you get or what comes to you? And so what I would want, if you were my client, is I'd say, I don't care what you do. Because again, I'm a leadership advisor and a coach, but I'm not a consultant, because I don't have the hubris to say, okay, listen, Cresta, you need, okay. But what I'll say is, listen, I don't care what you do, but I want you to have the capacity to do any of those four things, to take any of those four pathways. And as my business partner and co-author David Noble would say, 4 ways to win.
And so you're just sort of saying, actually, we're broadening out the toolkit here. And so your gut instinct, which serves you well in other contexts, right? In this particular case, it's really interesting when you talk about the example, because I'm reflecting and thinking, what is my natural propensity? And if I'm honest, the natural propensity is to make the problem go away, but I don't want to look like an idiot, right? Making the problem go away is you sell the thing cheaply, but I don't want to look. So I love this idea of sort of just having a toolkit, and then you can work out which one you want to deploy, and sort of reflecting on it. And of course, as you point out, the higher the stakes are, the harder in many respects that is, right? There's more time pressure. The consequences of getting it wrong are greater. And it would be correct to say that the tendency would then be, well, I'm going to rely on my gut instinct because that's seen me through. And so that's why this is a really interesting thing, because it's precisely because of the high stakes nature of it that there's the greatest risk of us getting something wrong. Is that the right way to look at it?
Well, that's interesting, because you're now bringing me back to my days as a trauma specialist. And under high stress, we become exaggerated versions of who we are. So if the reflex was ever going to hijack you, the higher the stakes, more likely you are to be hijacked.
Visually, for me, this feels a little bit like, in the Matrix when they slow everything down, and it feels a bit like that. You're basically saying, if we can slow down our thinking, and I guess if I were to use Kahneman terminology, I mean, this is really pulling away from system 1 and into system 2 thinking, so slow thinking, and saying, let's pause around this because this matters, and therefore we need to give you the ability to slow things down, think about it, and then decide what your course of action is.
Well, it's really funny you say that. That is exactly the image in my mind. And sometimes I'll even say, if you could stop time, like there you are, it's like all of a sudden, like you're tanking in that job interview, or you discover that this coworker has this horrible toxic worldview. How can you stop time and zip through our model, which I'd like to actually share what the model is.
Yeah, please do.
Model. Okay, so we want to make space. So how do you make space? The first thing is, there's a lot of research that just naming something gives you more control over what you do. So what do you want to name? That we call M is for mindful alertness. And the whole framework is MOVE. And we wanted people to be able to have the tools at their fingertips, and acronyms help. So M is for being mindfully alert, and mindful being open to things, sort of new mind, but alert like an athlete. Okay. And in a minute, I can say alert to what. Then O is for the options generator that I just talked to you about, having 4 ways to operate. That really comes from Rick Snyder's work on way power and willpower in terms of the work on hope theory. Then V is for vantage point, because if you have real clarity, that gives you an advantage, which is if you are really going to see clearly and you are able to factor in your own default ways of reacting, your bias, etc. How could you clearly see, know if you're over exaggerating the demand, minimizing it? And then E is to engage and affect change, which is not make everyone be a mind reader, completely and clearly be able to signal what your leadership is, and then iterate and communicate. So that's the MOVE model.
And so that's really your go-to thing. So you're at that point, you recognize it's one of these situations, and then you go through that. And what you're training people to do is to be able to do that as a reflex, I guess. And therefore, rather than your reflex being your reflex is going to your toolkit.
Yeah, I can give you we talk about how this works at the top of the house or in your own house. So would you rather hear a CEO story, or would you rather hear the story of a boy who doesn't want to do his homework?
Let's have a homework story. I'm intrigued by this.
Okay. So this one is a true story. Me, and when my son was 11, end of a long day, I come into the dining room and there's this sort of squalid mess on the table. And my son, Michael, looks up at me and says, "So, Mom, I'm done with my homework. Can I go watch TV?" Okay. Now, when I talked about being mindfully alert, and I told you I'd say mindfully alert to what? So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to do it. So mindfully alert to the external demands, external challenges, then the internal challenges you have to meet those. And then what are the interpersonal challenges? So in this case, not so simple. You walk in and what are you supposed to do? Your external demand is what? Get the stupid homework assignment done for tomorrow. Is it? Or is the true external demand helping your child develop a sense of discipline? Or is your external demand help your child to love learning and not go for the grades? So we have all these automatic ideas, but if we say, okay, stop, what is it I really need to accomplish? Okay, that's the first dimension of leadership. The second dimension of leadership is, who do I want to be in this moment? Like, and what are my internal resources, my values, my emotion regulation, resilience? Can I actually do what it is? Do I have the capacity to not just snap? And then the third one is interpersonally. How do I want to relate? So you walk in, there's the homework, and we're in M. And then that's, okay, what do I really need to do? How do I need to be? How do I need to relate? Okay, how do I need to relate? Then we go to the options generator. Do I lean in and say, now listen, Michael, you just have to get this homework done before you can go and watch TV. I'm sorry. Or do you lean back and say, well, I do think it would be, I'd like you to try to do a little bit more. We know how, your grades have been, maybe even go further back and talk about like the nature of work, something like that. Okay, fine. Then there's lean with. So, oh, hon, can I help? Let's sit down together, etc. Or do you not lean at all and just wait? Now, that's the hardest one to do, and I rarely do it, but this time I did, which is unusual. And so I just stopped for a moment and just took a couple breaths. And then this is what I call like opening the space for intuitive thinking, but not fast intuitive thinking like system 1. This is more like a system 3. How do I pause and, put down my system 2, slower thinking, but just, okay, what comes to me? And in this case, when I did that, the question came to me and I said, Michael, here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to just look at your work and ask yourself, am I proud of my work? And if you can say yes, just go watch TV. And I left the room. So, and then V, in terms of the vantage point, that's less relevant in this one. But, was I seeing clearly? And then E, I did do in terms of signaling, just making a very clear signal and then knowing to leave. So that's sort of the move model. So when something's thrown at you, buy that house, sell that house, the interview that's tanking, the toxic relative, how can you just do the matrix thing and just like stop time? And all this stuff can zip through your head in seconds if you have that framework in mind.
And so as you were talking, for me, this really resonates on what I might sort of term avoiding embarrassment. Right, is I want to feel like I've made the best possible decision. And often in life, right, there isn't a perfect solution. But what I want to feel like is if I look back on this, almost if I was in court recounting the decision I'd made and explaining myself, that actually it would feel like the best possible decision was there. And so I love this idea of sort of rather than rely on gut instinct, we say to ourselves, actually, here is a way. It does. I'm guessing you would say it doesn't guarantee you're going to make the best possible decision, but you're putting yourself in a much stronger position to get the best outcome, given the information you have available, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and so that you can say that question. Okay, I really did what I thought was best. Because I'm not sure what the data is now, but 15 years ago, I think there was an article in HBR that stuck with me for some reason, where it said that 75% of small business failure was due to over optimism. So, so you think, okay, external demand, lean in, I'm sure I'm right, go.
Right.
And that's just a really great way of speeding yourself into a brick wall. So I think having this kind of as a check and balance.
How do we know when it's right to deploy this and when we should go with our gut instinct? Because I was thinking, right, this sounds great, but I don't want to be deploying this every instance. When is it appropriate, and how do I know that I'm in one of those moments?
Okay, well, the first image that comes to mind is the, Indiana Jones one with the big, he goes, I got a bad feeling about that. So if you have something that is like that or a cousin of that, like, I don't know about this, make a space, make a space, make it fast. And when in doubt, stall. But just, I would say when you have that feeling. And the other one would be, okay, if I just stop a second, the stakes here are really high. This is going to impact a lot of people. And I may have, say, if I was a CEO, I might have my board going, do this, do this, do this. It's like, wait a minute, there's 10,000 people or 100,000 people that are going to be affected by this. I really better not go with my instinct right away and involve all of my team as a check and balance, but also not allow myself to be bullied and reflexively obedient. So I'd say, got a bad feeling about this, or like, this really matters. Or wait a minute, am I just doing something someone's telling me to do? So I'd say those are three possible triggers of when you might want to go, okay, need to make a space.
That's really, really interesting. And when I look at the different responses, presumably I have to practice those. And particularly when you talk about doing nothing, I mean, that it goes against action bias. It sort of feels like I don't know, you could sort of make an argument that feels irresponsible, right? Just stepping back and doing nothing. It's lazy. And so that presumably is one that one just has to practice because it doesn't come naturally necessarily to you. I mean, you could sort of do nothing because you're pretending it's not a problem. And that's not the same sort of what you're talking about here. But it's not something that these things we have to just rehearse, I presume. And so part of the exercise here is to recognize that these strategies exist and then get used to deploying them and see how they work out. Because obviously, if I've never done it before, I don't necessarily want to test it out on something that's massively high stakes for the first time. I need to feel comfortable that these strategies work.
So I have two things to say about that. And hopefully when I'm done with the first, I'll remember the second. So David Noble, who we wrote the book together, he is good friends with this guy, Chuck Jacoby, who is a 4-star general. I had no idea how impressive that was. I said, oh, that's great. How many are they? And he goes, not many, Carol. There's only been one 5-star general in the history of the United States, which was Eisenhower. I'm like, oh. So Chuck, very calm, quiet guy. What he says is it's all about the reps. And that's what you're saying. It's all about the reps. So for example, let's just do one set of reps is who do I want to be right now? So that idea hit me once when I was thinking about New Year's resolutions. I'm like, oh, please, I'm so sorry with the, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to be nicer. No, I'm not. So I just thought, oh, what's the question? And so that's when the question, who do I want to be, came up. I said, okay, so then, and please forgive me, this is such like a white privileged woman problem. We were going off on vacation and some people met us at the train and it's like snow and we've got luggage. And like, I just knew the woman was going to take us in the wrong direction. It was some little village with dead ends. And so she sauntered off and we're dragging our bags. And sure enough, she's like, oh no, this isn't the road. I'm like, oh, great. Okay. And I'm about to have, you can imagine. And I'm like, okay, Carol, who do you want to be right now? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person who's pissed off because she yet again, and I knew, no, that's not who I want to be. Or we get there and we've decided to stay where they're staying, which I knew I wouldn't want because there was no view. I get there, well, I'm doing it because this is what we decided, to which they then say, oh, and we're staying on the other side of town. And 100 feet away is the place I really wanted to stay. And so now I'm for a week in a dark hovel in a beautiful place. Okay, so I had many, many, many reps. Okay, Carol, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Okay, who do you want to be right now? So one day I tried that. I think I asked myself the question 80 times, and it built that muscle. So now if I'm in a situation and it's sort of a startle thing, I'll go, okay, who do I want to be right now? For someone else, it might be, what do I really need to do right now? What really needs to be done now? I think my team needs to make a decision. Is that really what needs to happen here? So over and over the reps. And so you can sort of go through. We're also writing a sort of a toolkit that will come out by Harvard later. But you're exactly right. It starts small, build the muscle, and it becomes a reflex.
The starting out testing it, I mean, you're really, because you're asking people to go against their gut instincts, this is, I presume to start with, this is hard, right? This isn't something that sort of, because we're going against muscle memory and gut reaction and all those things. And so a little bit like building any new form of habit, this requires effort to get this to get this right. But then I'm assuming it becomes easier over time as we do it. And therefore, is it a case of I try one of these approaches, and so the first one I learn, if you like, is tougher, and then the rest are all easier, or are they all individually challenging? How does that work?
It's very, very unique. Like and it's really different for each person. And the unlock is different for each person. For me, the unlock is, who do I want to be right now? Oh, I want to be of service right now. For someone else, it might be, I totally know what I need to do right now. I'm a great strategist, etc. So we'll all have our strengths, and we'll all have the thing that will help us. But what can be useful is to think about a recent experience you had that may not have gone well, and to think, if you knew or deployed any one of these, would that experience have gone better for you? And then it's like, yeah. If I'd been able to regulate, if I'd been able to see the actual challenge, if I'd been able to lean in or back, et cetera, et cetera, if I'd really taken out my filters. So I think that's one way to get it. It's like, something probably in recent times could have gone much better if you had had this at your fingertips.
Right. And one of the things I think is interesting about this is we're very, very good at beating ourselves up. Well, most of us are, right? There are some people that we know, some high-profile people who never make mistakes, right? Who are perfect in every way. This is not a framework for them. They should just continue doing what they're doing, right? Because they're not going to adopt. They don't need it. But for the average human being, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's not just dealing with things in the moment. It's a huge time sink of regret and looking back and playing through. We all do this where you play through that. If only I'd had here's the alternate script that I would write. And I'm always reminded of that thing the French call l'esprit d'escalier, which is the sort of the witty comeback that you would have made, but it only occurs to you when you're walking up the stairs afterwards. So that you've missed the moment. And so what I really love about this is you're basically going, let's try and minimize that time that we spend regretting crappy decisions that we've made in the past. And so not only are we making better decisions, but we can actually we can feel more confident in the ones that we made. We don't have to spend so long regretting things.
Exactly. So there's a couple things there is, okay, when you think about the third dimension of leadership, what you want to do interpersonally, well, we also need to have a good relationship with ourselves. So how can we kind of lean with ourselves, not letting ourselves off the hook from a sense of being irresponsible, but how to really connect with ourselves. So that's one. The other one is, so say, oh, if only I made that witty remark, and then you're kind of off on yourself. It's like, is this who I want to be? Is this who I really want to be? And what about that? Okay, this is just ego. Am I going to let this kind of ruin my inner life? So how do you can sort of find that language to again, sort of increase self-awareness and self-responsibility, but not to go to town on yourself.
You refer to leadership, but the more I think about this is super, I can see completely if you're in, particularly military is a great example, matter of life and death. We got to get this stuff right. Politicians making big calls, surgeons, life or death situations, all those sorts of things, serious consequences. But you're also highlighting things that for everyday decision making, where we're all faced with, I always forget the numbers, something like 30,000 decisions we make in a day. I mean, some of them are insignificant, which socks I wear doesn't particularly matter if I get that wrong, but this is incredibly helpful. Yes, in leadership positions, but this is a skill that we can all use for even some smaller things where we might not always be getting things right.
Yeah. And unfortunately for me, I only really figured that out after we'd finished the book. So there is like almost nothing about this in the book itself. And it all can be applied, but I really wished I'd figured this out about a month earlier than I did. But yes, it's all about self-leadership. It's like leadership of others, but really it's about self-leadership in order to lead others.
And I mean, it makes perfect sense as well, though, right? Because even if you get to that point where you say, well, that it does apply to every single thing, right? The leadership stuff's much more exciting and interesting. And we kind of want to, the thing I thought was wonderful is it's sort of, we may not all ever, some people won't get to leadership positions because they don't aspire to that or they don't have the aptitude for it. But we love reading about it. And so if I look at sort of going to bookstores and you'll read the autobiographies of, sports stars or business leaders or whatever it happens to be.
Oh, princes.
I was going to say members of the royal family and that sort of, right? You read those and you sort of think, okay, and we're curious to know how all those things work. So even if we're never going to be running we're never going to be a member of the royal family, we sort of, there may be some lessons for us in what's going on there. So I love this idea that you've picked the kind of the leadership piece, because one, I think you're absolutely right. I wish we had better leaders. And I think if we look at political leaders, I feel badly let down very often by the quality of the people, but also the quality of the decision making. And those two things are sort of interrelated. And so I love that. And I wish they would read it. So I'm looking forward to you stealthing this out to all the people that need to. But I guess for most of us, this is a, as you say, personal mastery. And so the more I'm hearing you talk about it, the more I'm thinking about it is actually it sits very much in that this is useful on a day-to-day basis, even if you're not leading thousands of troops.
Yeah. And speaking of stories, a lot of what we do in the book, and one of the reasons HBR bought this book in 15 minutes as a result of a conversation where I wasn't actually selling the book. I was trying to find a ghostwriter because I didn't know that my co-author David could write. Turns out he's a better writer than I am, which was humbling and very gratifying. But I thought I was asking for a ghostwriter. And the guy said, well, sounds interesting. And then I'm going, well, wait. I know it's too early to talk to you. I should have,
we shouldn't be having this conversation.
I said, I just to like not look like an idiot. I'm like, I understand that we should have, the table of contents. We should have a sample this. We should have this. We should have that. And he's like, nope. Like the idea, very novel, very free, good, rich. And we'd send him like an 8-page single-space dense thing because I'm going to take it to the murder board on Tuesday. And I shouldn't call it a murder board. But what he really liked was I was very happy about this. Not exactly narrative nonfiction, but we tell stories. Like we start out, and so we don't describe a case. We tell a story. And one of the things, this quote didn't make it into the book. A blander sentence did. But what we said is like, welcome to the secretive world of CEO coaching. Because we will tell stories, and they're true. They're often composites of two different people, so that people can't figure out who they are. But they're really good stories, but they're almost like parables or fairy tales in a way. Here's this arc of somebody's experience, and then what can you learn from it, and what did they learn from it?
And there's something fascinating about leadership, I guess, in many respects, because we tend to sort of think, if I look at the military, for example, they have academies and they train people in leadership. But very often we see, particularly in business, and if I think about the industry, I used to work in financial services, you can get people in leadership positions who've got, whose reason for being in that leadership position isn't their leadership qualities. Right. It's to do with the fact they can make they're very good at one thing that isn't necessarily there. And maybe the skills that will propel them into the leadership position, i.e. the political nous, the networking, all those sorts of the being charming, all that stuff, that doesn't necessarily make them good leaders. And so the reason I find it very fascinating is that we have this image of kind of, we think about, well, everybody's going to be, they'll have gone through some training that will get them there. but they may, they may not be well suited to it, and the selection process may not have got the best people. And so that's why I find some of these leadership stories fascinating, because you sort of, it's not amazingly talented people who are great at leadership who've got there. It's just ordinary people who have foibles like the rest of us, and they're just struggling with bigger issues.
Yeah, so I can see that in the financial world, but you also see it in the medical world. The person who is the president of blah 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 has the longest resume, and very often they are not the best leaders. A lovely exception for that at the moment is George Daly, who is the dean of Harvard Medical School, who has a tremendous resume. He's married to Amy Edmondson, by the way, the psychological safety woman. And he is actually a great leader, and unhappily, the exception. Most of the time, it's the long resume. I'm at the top of my field. I've gotten the most grants. I should lead. It's the subject matter expert issue, which is a completely wrong identity for a leader. One of the things I talk about in the book is entity identity. When we've got 2 chapters on stepping into a bigger role. And one of the big challenges is, how do I change my identity from a me identity, not even to a we identity, but to an entity identity? So when I am in my role, for example, let's say I'm someone who doesn't matter if people diss me. It usually doesn't. It's like, what do I care? But, okay, so I'm in a meeting and somebody disses me and say, Carol doesn't really care. But Carol, the CEO, realizes this person is not respecting the role. And even though it doesn't bother me, it's not okay for the role, for me, or in this case, me as entity, for this to be okay. So I need to have the capacity to lean in and say, listen, if you have more issues for that, I think it would be really important for us to air them and discuss them, perhaps afterwards, where me would go, I don't care. So there's really very different identities that you have to take on when you step into a leadership role.
And when you talk about it like that, these responses, to start with, are we having to act sometimes and do things that aren't unnatural to us, and that we're doing because we're doing things we wouldn't naturally do. We're having to act a little bit, and that's a great example where your personality would allow you to behave in one way, but because the title that you carry, and so you have to shift what you do because the position becomes more important than your personal reaction to it.
Right.
So there's an element of sort of, I don't want to say faking it, but acting is probably the closest I can get to it. And so really what you're encouraging people to do is to take on additional things. And what I was wondering about that was, presumably over time that does become who you are. So if you're doing enough of this acting, you're shifting. So in some cases, we're actually changing people's personalities and decision making. And so you may be forced by your role to do this, but actually presumably it has an impact on your personality. In other words, to use a very simple example, it might change. You're going to be formally trying to change the way you make decisions at work, but that may also change the way you make decisions in your private life.
Yes, but I'm going to quibble with you because I really don't like the idea of it's acting. What it is tapping into your deeper purpose and your mission. And it's, who do I need to be right now? And it's expanding my options. So it's really not, I'm pretending, but it's like I'm pulling on another part of me that until now I have allowed to lie dormant because I haven't needed it. But now I need it. So I think some people in fact do just put a leadership mask on and it is acting. But what I would hope for is people realizing I'm needing to do this, and leadership is often a sacrifice. So, or as I say, every CEO I say this to cracks up laughing, but I'll say, oh yeah, you know the secret of leadership. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, leadership sucks. And it does. It may look great from the outside, but inside, as one of my CEOs said, is I feel everybody owns me. And it's like, well, they do. When you're in that role, they do. And that's one of the reasons why some of these people are so lonely, because everybody has an agenda. Everybody wants from them. And the resilience you need to build up, I hope, to come from a place of mission and purpose rather than of contempt.
Right. So in other words, from an ethical, so you may be taking a different decision, but you're not compromising, for example, ethical principles, who you are. You're if it is doing things in a different way, it's doing them for the right reasons. And so actually, if that does impact your personal decision making, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because it's bringing more of who you want to be out.
Yeah, and it's a real sense of duty and ethic in terms of what really is the right thing to do here. And it could be also the opposite of the example I gave. So for me, getting dissed kind of rolls off my back. And what's great about that is I can have a spectacular failure and we'll talk to the people for whom I failed and say, okay, so listen, what did I do? What else did I do? You know, and when other people are like diving under the table, I'm really curious. But now let's imagine it's the opposite, that I'm in that meeting and someone has dissed me and I am furious. Okay, so Carol is allowed to be furious. The role of the CEO is not. And so again, it's not so much that I'm pretending to not be furious, but it's like, wait a second, if I'm being true to my identity as a leader rather than identity as an individual, I really need to just take the blow and move on.
I guess what what you've nicely exposed there is the sort of, everybody. But, and I see it, in fact, it's particularly, you see it in political spheres where there's a lot of fighting to get to a senior position. And then people get there and it's like, it's terrible, as you say. And there's a great quote I read recently, it was about Boris Johnson, our former Prime Minister here in the UK, where classic quote was, he doesn't want to be Prime Minister, he wants to have been Prime Minister. And I love that idea because you're right. I mean, leadership's god awful. And I've been in, relatively senior positions within the organisations I was in, and it's, you sort of go, this is not all it's cracked up. The title's great, right? Having the office is great. You've got it, but man, it's tough, and man, it's a bit tedious. And I sort of look back on it, and I think all of the things you're talking about there, that I mean, it's just awful in some respect, and that's why I think I love the idea that you have. We don't want someone being president of the US for more than 8 years, right? And you start to think, well, there's a good reason for that because. One is to root out. We need a change is good. You don't want stale leadership. But the second thing is, there's only so much that people can bear.
Yeah.
And I think what you're exposing beautifully with some of these things is sort of, people who aren't in leadership positions can read this and really think about, actually, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Mm-hmm. And it comes with some serious downsides, which to your point is having to go, what you might want to do personally is not what you can do in that position.
And, we also see that when you become a parent. Like there it is. You have I remember when my children were 1 and 3 years old and otherwise known as the hell years, alternatively known as the gooey years, because you are always gooey. And there's a lot of times you just want to do one thing, but it's like, okay, here, Carol just wants to say, screw this all. I want to go in the other room and I want to read a book. Okay, you got a 1 and a 3-year-old, not going to be a good idea. So it really also applies to parenting. Like in my role as a parent here, I really need to tolerate being gooey. Be aware that if I'm at a pool, I can't read a book, not for half a second. Look at those people reading books at a pool. Wow. And what did I do all day before I had children? I don't remember. And then when they're old enough, you go, I don't know what to do anymore because I want to do something, muscles have atrophied. So yes, it's true in a leadership role, but I think anybody who's a parent, and aunt or net or uncle, there's oftentimes that we have to submerge ourselves into the role that we have.
Oh, yeah, obviously the book is about to come out. You've talked about some of the other what's your sort of next area of research? I mean, I reckon you've got a lot of work to do having these sorts of conversations, promoting the book and kind of getting word out there. But what's your next sort of research area or thing that would spark your interest?
Okay, well, I've already spent a number of months working on my next book. And I'm not going to reveal the title of it because the title is very compelling. When I said the title to the head of publicity of HR, her jaw dropped. So I cannot say it out loud.
Mhm.
But what it is about is how, and it links a little more to my trauma background, which is really what do you do in situations where you are exposed to a toxic leader, where you get the feedback that you are a toxic leader, or that when you look in the mirror, you are toxic to yourself. And so looking at in a different way, how to manage and metabolize that. So I'm very interested. I was exposed to evil in some ways when I was growing up. And so I find it fascinating.
I find it really intriguing that just the whole. I mean, the badge toxic leader feels to me like it's a relatively new invention. I mean, the idea, like people who bad leaders have been around for ages, but it feels like something we've given a name to now and acknowledged. Are there more toxic leaders, or are we just more aware of it as a concept?
Well, back in my old life, that was what we used to ask about sexual abuse. Is sexual abuse actually an epidemic now? Or is it that people are now naming it? And I think it has been around forever and probably even less now. I mean, go back to the Middle Ages, basically everybody
That's true.
abused all the time. It's not even seen as abuse because it's the way of life. So I do think the thing on toxic leaders is that people are naming it. The danger is also of over-naming it. So Liz Wiseman, I don't know if you know Liz, she wrote Impact Players and Multipliers. And she talks about people multiply or diminish other people. But that most of the people who diminish other people are accidental. They're accidental diminishers. So part of what I would be talking about, which is why I'm doing it from all three directions.
Mhm.
So very often, if I'm being labeled as a toxic, abusive, abrasive leader, it's often a side effect. And if you flip it back to the three dimensions of leadership, it may be that my external demands on me are so strong, I'm getting screamed at for not meeting my numbers, but I don't have the internal fortitude to handle this. Then the way I relate to others becomes toxic or difficult for them. And it's even more complicated because that same behavior, say bullying type, powerful aggression behavior, actually makes some thrive. So it even becomes more complex than that. But so that's sort of the direction I'm going in from here. So I can't say I remember them, but I read about 100 studies so far trying to pull together what it is, how you can manage it, and what's the pathway from the event of feeling someone has treated you badly and how you feel about yourself. So it's very
Wow.
much, and I would think of that as, I won't say the main title, but the subtitle would be something like, real-time leadership under fire.
And so that brings us neatly. I can't wait to read that. By the way, sounds just really intriguing on so many levels. And I think in part that also what you've exposed there is that's nobody wants to be thought of as toxic, right? And so I was just reflecting, thinking, my immediate go-to reaction is all these toxic people I've worked with in the past. And then it was that bit where you said, well, if you get the feedback that you're toxic, and I suddenly thought, oh, actually, that's that mirror point is quite interesting. So I can't wait to read that. But there's this common thread that you have of sort of people under pressure. And I guess that's a natural function of your background. And that seems to me to be the thing that drives you sort of looking and saying, actually, there are pressure cooker moments, if you like, that will drive human behavior. And you're kind of helping us deal with that because there are more pressures probably now than ever before in terms of the volume of information that we've got, the transparency around. And so really you're helping us collectively manage that in your field of research, I guess. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of it exactly that way, but you're right. I feel badly, I think, for people who are put, have a gun to their head. I had one of my CEOs once, and I worked with his founder, owner, chair, and the CEO. And he's like, and the CEO was, and the chair, was a force of nature. He's like a storm, an amazing person. But my guy said, I do one thing I get shot in the head, meet your numbers. Then I become a bully and I got shot in the head. So no matter what I do, there's 2 guns pointing to my head all the time. And I said, well, this is true, but let's remember they're blanks. So they're going to hurt, but they're not going to kill you. Let's figure out what to do and how to navigate this. But I do feel drawn to people that I see under pressure. And the CEOs that I work with, a lot of them are under the kind of pressure that would just crush, a normal person, would crush me. So yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. So 2 insights from your show. One is a puppy thing from my being raised in a kennel. How obvious is that? Never thought of it. And the people in the pressure cooker. That is the theme.
Wow. Well, look, I mean, from my perspective, I have learned a ton of things, and I know my listeners will as well. So I'm glad that you're coming away having learned something. Before I let you go, Carol, remind people about the book, where they can get it from, and how they can find you if they want to learn more about you.
Okay. So you have to know how to spell my name. So carolkauffman.com. That's CAROL, Carol. Kauffman, 2 F's, 1 N. carolkauffman.com. When you get there, you'll see real-time leadership, find your winning moves when the stakes are high. And you can, put your name in. If you want, you can be on my mailing list. And I have a bunch of things about real-time leadership, but I also have a private library. By example, I have about 20 studies in there on destructive leadership. I have a number of coach demos where I'm coaching Whitney Johnson, Marshall Goldsmith, and some other people, and lots of resources. So that's carolkauffman.com. Then click on real-time leadership. Now, if you have the capacity to remember more than one thing at once, which I typically don't, the other way you can go is to our dedicated book website, which is realtimeleadershipinstitute.com, but that's too long to write. So it's RTL, realtimeleadershipinstitute.com. So you can go there directly if you don't ever want to be on my mailing list. And you can go there indirectly if you would like to be on my mailing list and have access to resources. So
amazing.
Yes.
I will put links to all of those things as ever in the show notes. So for people who weren't able to scribble quickly enough, or who, like me, have a goldfish-like memory, that will be all there available. So, Carol, I want to say thank you for what you're looking at, because I think it is really interesting. And I love things that just expose, we sort of have these views of the world, and anybody that's challenging that and exposing things and helping us to understand that is right. People that are helping us to make better decisions are always my friends, because I'm very capable of making terrible ones. So I'm delighted that. And thank you so much for being a great guest on the podcast. I've learned a lot and it's been thoroughly entertaining.
And thank you. You can be on one of these podcasts and you can really feel smart, or you can really feel like, ugh. And the way you ask questions and your own kind of natural interest, I feel also brought out the best in me, which we know because it's probably related to mirror neurons. So thank you for being a great host and bringing out the best in me as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my dear.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Carol for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Carol and the book Real-Time Leadership that she co-authored with David Noble, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. Finally, your reminder that my book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance, is out very soon, and you can pre-order that now. Links to that are available in the show notes. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Remember to have a plan for when you get under pressure, because you'll make better decisions. And thank you so much for listening.